Hidden deep within the human body lies a mystery so profound that cultures across continents have remembered it in whispers, symbols, and rituals. At the very base of the spine, ancient texts say there coils a force, alive yet dormant, waiting like a serpent curled in sleep. The Sanskrit word for this energy is Kundalini, and though it originates in the East, its echoes are everywhere. Americans may know the serpent first from the Bible, the sly tempter in Eden, or from the rattlesnakes that rattle warnings in desert canyons. For many, the snake is a symbol of danger, sin, even death. Yet for others, it is the emblem of healing. Two serpents spiraling up a staff, the caduceus, that still marks American hospitals today. Why this duality? Why does the serpent appear both as destroyer and healer, as danger and salvation? Because the serpent has always been more than an animal. It is a mirror of the energy woven through life itself. In ancient cultures, the serpent's coiling, shedding, and rebirth embodied the cycles of nature. Its sudden strikes mirrored power. Its skin sloughing promised renewal. For yogis, mystics, and shamans, it became the perfect image for the hidden energy of transformation. And yet, for most of us, this serpent remains asleep. We may sense its stirrings in fleeting moments, an overwhelming rush of emotion, a shiver in prayer, the breath-catching beauty of a song, but rarely does the serpent rise fully. The question has haunted seekers for millennia. Why does Kundalini remain dormant? To understand why the serpent sleeps, we must first look at how deeply it has been woven into human imagination. No culture escaped its coils. Among Native American traditions, the serpent often appears as guardian and teacher. The Hopi spoke of Pololukon, a great horned serpent associated with water and fertility. The Cherokee told of the Uktena, a massive serpent whose glance could kill, but whose crystal horn bestowed wisdom and power. Here in America, long before yoga studios and meditation apps, indigenous people danced and prayed to serpentine forces of renewal. In Africa and Australia, the rainbow serpent slithered through myth as creator of rivers and protector of the land. In Greece, Asclepius, the god of healing, carried a staff encircled by a serpent, the same symbol still used by modern medicine. Even the caduceus, two serpents spiraling around Hermes' staff, spoke of balance between opposites, of movement in harmony. And then, of course, there is Eden. In the Western imagination, the serpent became the great deceiver, the one who whispered humanity into downfall. This image has shaped centuries of fear in the American religious landscape, branding the snake as evil, temptation, corruption. But what if this story, too, carried a hidden truth? In offering knowledge, the serpent may not have been condemning humanity, but awakening it. Could the serpent's role have always been double-edged? Dangerous if misunderstood, transformative if honored. From the deserts of the Bible Belt to the temples of India, from Native American chants to Greek healing rites, the serpent whispers the same story. There is power coiled within us, waiting to arise. The American encounter with Kundalini came not in ancient myth, but in the upheavals of the 20th century. In the 1960s and 70s, when yoga first spread across the United States alongside psychedelics and Eastern philosophy, Kundalini was more than a foreign word. It was a cultural shock. Young seekers returning from India described overwhelming awakenings, visions of light, uncontrollable shaking, waves of ecstasy, sudden bursts of creativity. Some experienced bliss so profound they called it divine union. Others descended into what psychiatrists labeled breakdowns, insomnia, hallucinations, panic attacks. Mainstream America recoiled. The serpent that yogis praised sounded suspiciously like madness to doctors. Kundalini syndrome was catalogued in psychiatric journals. Yoga communities whispered cautionary tales of students who went too far. What had been sacred in India was branded dangerous in the West. But why? Ancient traditions had safeguards, teachers who guided students step by step, rituals that prepared the body, communities that supported the process. In America, seekers often experimented alone, in dorm rooms, communes, and suburban basements, without maps, without elders. The serpent had no container. No wonder she struck like lightning. This first contact left a cultural scar. To this day, Americans often approach Kundalini with suspicion, associating it with chaos or cults. The very word still carries an aura of danger. And yet, the counterculture also planted seeds. For every story of breakdown, there was one of breakthrough. Poets, musicians, and innovators who spoke of a force inside them, awakening creativity, clarity, and courage. Bob Dylan wrote of electric inspiration. The Grateful Dead played concerts that pulsed with serpentine rhythm. Behind the music, art, and movements of the 60s was a whisper. The serpent was stirring. But Kundalini is not confined to esoteric yoga halls or psychedelic journeys. She stirs quietly in ordinary American lives, often unnoticed. Think of the chills that rise on your arms when gospel music swells in a southern church, or the trembling breath that comes in the hush before saying, "I love you," for the first time. Think of the way grief surges like a storm through the chest at a funeral, or how laughter makes the belly quake until tears spill. These are not random sensations. They are echoes of the serpent uncoiling, fleeting glimpses of a deeper current. The body knows her, even when the mind does not. Yet, we dismiss these moments as just emotions, just nerves. In doing so, we overlook the sacred. The serpent remains asleep, not because she is absent, but because we fail to recognize her language. The truth is, Kundalini is not foreign. She is not Indian, not exotic, not other. She is human. She pulses through the spine of every American as surely as she does through any yogi in Varanasi. The only difference is whether we have been taught to listen. So why does she not rise? Why, after centuries of myth, decades of yoga, and countless seekers, does the serpent remain still for most of us? The first answer is over-intellectualization. Americans raised in a culture of reason and productivity try to control everything with mind. We read books, follow instructions, optimize routines. But Kundalini is not a machine to be engineered. She is an intelligence older than thought itself. The second answer is fear of losing control. In a society built on schedules, deadlines, and self-improvement, surrender feels like weakness. To let go, to shake, to weep, to laugh uncontrollably, these are often seen as breakdowns, not breakthroughs. So we tighten, brace, and suppress, keeping the serpent bound. The third answer is trauma. Generational wounds, slavery, war, poverty, displacement live in American bodies. Personal trauma, abuse, shame, neglect settles in muscles, hips, and spines. The serpent respects these boundaries. She does not barge into locked rooms. She waits until we create safety enough to feel. And this is the paradox. Kundalini's dormancy is not failure. It is protection. The serpent sleeps until we are ready to dance with her. Ancient mystics once carried a map. It was not written in books, but inscribed in dance, chant, and ritual. It said, "The serpent does not rise in straight lines. She spirals, she coils, she weaves." But in modern practice, we have flattened her. We treat the spine as a ladder, the body as a machine, awakening as a vertical climb. We miss the curves, the rotations, the undulations that allow energy to slip past resistance. We build skyscrapers while forgetting rivers. We chase highways while ignoring winding forest paths. Our architecture is linear. Nature's is spiral. And so, the serpent waits. She is not sleeping because she is weak. She is sleeping because we are speaking the wrong language, trying to open a round door with a straight key. Perhaps she is not dormant at all. Perhaps she is listening, waiting for us to remember the lost movement, waiting for us to spiral again. The question is no longer, why hasn't she risen? The question is, have we remembered how to move as she moves? We Americans love straight lines. Our highways cut across prairies in endless grids. Our cities rise in rigid rectangles of glass and steel. Our education marches us from grade to grade, diploma to diploma, job to promotion. Our calendars slice time into neat boxes. Progress, we are told, is always upward and forward. And so when modern seekers hear of Kundalini, they imagine it too as a straight ascent. A bolt of energy shooting from the base of the spine to the crown of the head. A climb from lower chakras to higher ones, rung by rung like a corporate ladder. But nature does not move this way. The universe does not build in straight lines. Even the light from stars bends across space-time. Rivers curve. Trees spiral in rings. Galaxies whirl in arms of rotation. The straight line is a human fantasy, a geometry of rulers and blueprints, not of living things. To insist on awakening in a straight line is to miss the serpent's true language. She has never known rigidity. She coils, twists, weaves. She is not a drill boring upward through obstacles, but a current finding its path of least resistance. This is the forgotten truth. Kundalini refuses the straight path because life itself refuses the straight path. Look closely, and you'll see the spiral everywhere. It is the blueprint of creation itself. At the heart of every cell is DNA, the double helix, two serpents entwined, climbing in an endless dance of life. Every trait, every memory, encoded in a spiral staircase. Without this winding ladder, there is no you, no me, no humanity. Above us, galaxies swirl in luminous spirals, stars flung outward in graceful arcs. The Milky Way, the very home of our solar system, stretches like a cosmic whirlpool. Astronomers estimate that up to 70% of galaxies follow this spiral form. The universe, it seems, spins to the same rhythm that coils within our spine. Here on Earth, the spiral governs growth. Sunflowers bloom in Fibonacci spirals. Pine cones layer scales in perfect rotation. The chambered nautilus builds its shell in ever-widening coils. Tornadoes rip through plains in spiraling fury. Ocean whirlpools twist in currents. Even hurricanes, the most destructive storms, move in the elegant geometry of spirals. And inside us, the body remembers. Each chakra, when fully alive, spins as a wheel. Breath circulates in rhythm. The spine, when free, undulates in waves. The spiral is not an ornament of nature. It is nature's chosen design. Efficient, balanced, endlessly expansive. So when Kundalini rises, is it any surprise she follows the same law? If the spiral is so universal, why did America forget it? Why do we cling to ladders, steps, and rigid hierarchies? Part of the answer lies in our history. The nation was built on conquest, westward expansion, industrial growth, linear progress at all costs. Railroads carved lines across indigenous land. Assembly lines replaced artisans with machines. Skyscrapers reached upward as monuments to vertical ambition. Linear thinking shaped the American psyche. The American dream promised an upward climb. Start poor, work hard, rise higher. Success was not measured in cycles or flows, but in straight-line graphs. More money, more power, more productivity. Even in religion, the story became linear. Creation, sin, salvation, heaven. A one-way journey, a straight highway to eternity. So when Eastern practices like yoga and Tantra entered America, they were unconsciously reshaped into this linear mold. Kundalini became another ladder to climb, another project to complete, another achievement to unlock. But the serpent does not bow to corporate metaphors. She does not march like a soldier or climb like an executive. She spirals like wind, like water, like galaxies. And when we force her into straight lines, she resists. This is why so many Americans practicing meditation and yoga feel stuck. They push upward with willpower, expecting reward at the crown, only to feel frustration, burnout, or emptiness. They are trying to speak to the serpent in the wrong geometry. Ironically, while modern America forgot the spiral, indigenous traditions on this land remembered it well. Among the Navajo, sand paintings depicted spiral patterns of energy. The Lakota traced the sacred hoop, the never-ending circle of life. Hopi kivas were built with spiral symbols carved into stone. In Cherokee tales, the Uktena serpent's coiling body guarded hidden knowledge. In African traditions brought to America through enslaved peoples also carried spiral wisdom. Drumming patterns looped in cycles. Dances swayed in rotations, hips circling to awaken ancestral memory. Even in Christian mysticism, the spiral appears. Cathedrals in Europe built labyrinths that pilgrims walked not in straight lines, but in winding circuits, each turn a prayer, each curve a meditation. This practice migrated quietly into America, hidden in church floors and gardens. Jazz itself, the great American art form, is spiral music. It does not march like a military band. It circles themes, improvises around them, repeats with variation, spirals upward into ecstasy. The spiral never left this land. We simply stopped noticing it. Today, even science has begun to circle back to spiral truths. Neuroscientists describe brain waves that oscillate in rhythmic spirals across hemispheres. Physicists study vortex-based mathematics, suggesting energy flows more efficiently in rotation. Biologists map embryonic growth and find spiral symmetry guiding the very formation of the human body. NASA's photographs of distant galaxies reveal breathtaking spirals billions of light-years away. Climate scientists analyze hurricanes and tornadoes, recognizing that the spiral is nature's way of balancing force and flow. Even technology borrows the spiral. Turbines, propellers, and magnetic coils all follow its law. Engineers discovered what shamans knew long ago. Energy flows best when it spins. And yet, in spirituality, many still cling to stiff postures, rigid meditations, and linear visualizations. We stretch our bodies like machines, forgetting they are rivers. We breathe in squares instead of circles. We treat Kundalini like a rocket to launch, when she is more like smoke that swirls. The science is clear. The serpent was right all along. Why does this matter? Because when we ignore the spiral, we exhaust ourselves. We compress energy into straight channels, forcing what was meant to flow. Consider trauma. In therapy, healing rarely happens in straight lines. Memories surface, recede, resurface again. Emotions spiral back, each time with new depth. Recovery is not upward progress, but a spiral journey through layers of grief and release. Consider love. Relationships do not move step by step like a staircase. They cycle through closeness, distance, conflict, and renewal. The dance is spiral, not linear. Consider creativity. Writers, musicians, and artists describe inspiration not as a ladder, but as a spiral, returning again and again to a theme, each time at a higher octave. Healing, love, creativity, all followed the spiral. Why should awakening be any different? The serpent teaches us this. When you allow energy to spiral, resistance dissolves. Obstacles become doorways. The current finds its way around walls. Instead of forcing Kundalini upward, we allow her to wind, twist, and weave through us. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. Ancient practices preserved this truth. In Kundalini Yoga, subtle rotations of hips and shoulders created resonance. In Taoist alchemy, qi spiraled through microcosmic orbits. In Sufi rituals, dervishes spun in circles to awaken ecstasy. In hula, dancers traced spirals of earth, ocean, and sky. But modern seekers, sitting stiff in meditation apps, often overlook it. They breathe forcefully upward, clench their spines, and wonder why nothing happens. They treat awakening like climbing stairs. The forgotten movement is spiral. A gentle pelvic circle, a spinal wave, a shoulder roll. These simple gestures open gates that no amount of mental effort can unlock. They whisper in the serpent's language. They say, "It is safe to rise." Without spiral, Kundalini remains still, not because she is unwilling, but because she is unseen. What would it mean if Americans embraced the spiral once more? It would mean shifting from conquest to cooperation, from productivity to presence, from climbing ladders to dancing circles. It would mean seeing healing not as getting over it, but as spiraling deeper into truth. It would mean reimagining success not as linear growth, but as cyclical balance. It would mean remembering that awakening is not about leaving the body behind, but moving through it with rhythm. That Kundalini does not rise in a line, but in a dance. That life itself has never been a march. It has always been a spiral. Imagine standing beneath the night sky, gazing at the Milky Way's luminous swirl. Imagine holding a seashell to your ear and hearing the spiral echo of the ocean. Imagine watching your own breath rise and fall in a circular rhythm. These are not metaphors, they are reminders. The spiral is everywhere, waiting to be remembered. The serpent at the base of your spine is not asleep. She is waiting for you to stop pushing, stop climbing, stop forcing. Waiting for you to notice the curves in your breath, the circles in your hips, the rhythms in your heartbeat. For she will not rise by command. She will rise by resonance. And resonance is always spiral. In America, the body has been treated less like a temple and more like a factory. We measure it, sculpt it, optimize it. We count calories, track steps, wear devices that monitor heartbeats by the second. Fitness ads scream about six-pack abs, burning fat, building muscle. Productivity gurus tell us to hack our biology, as if human flesh were software to be upgraded. But in all this obsession with performance, something essential is lost. The body becomes an object, an instrument to be managed, improved, displayed. We forget what ancient mystics never doubted. The body is not a machine. It is a living temple, sacred not because of how it looks, but because of what flows through it. Kundalini cannot rise in a body treated like a machine. She waits for a body remembered as sacred. Where did this machine view of the body come from? Much of it traces back to the Industrial Revolution. Factories reshaped human life into mechanical rhythms, shift bells, assembly lines, time clocks. Workers became cogs in larger machines. Health was measured not by wholeness, but by output. How much labor one body could produce before breaking. Science, too, adopted mechanical metaphors. Descartes described the body as a clockwork system of pulleys and gears. Doctors in the 19th century dissected cadavers as though they were engines to be repaired. Even today, medical language echoes the machine. We speak of heart pumps, neural wiring, immune defenses. This worldview has its uses. Medicine advanced, surgeries saved lives. But it also narrowed our imagination. We began to believe the body was nothing more than a set of parts, fixable only through mechanics. And when yoga entered America, it too was pressed into this mold. Poses became exercises. Breath became performance. Power yoga promised toned muscles. Spiritual practices were stripped of their fluidity and bent into regimens. The serpent recoils in such environments. She is not interested in machines. She is interested in temples. When a temple is neglected, it decays. When a machine is overworked, it breaks. Both truths apply to the body. Every experience we refuse to feel leaves an imprint somewhere inside us. Childhood shame, adult heartbreak, ancestral fear, they lodge in tissues, muscles, joints. The hips store silence and grief. The belly holds guilt and hunger for worth. The spine carries stories of safety and authority. Trauma is not all in your head. It is in your body. And Kundalini, as the intelligence of life itself, respects this. She does not burst through locked doors. She will not rise in a body armored against its own memories. This is why so many seekers report nothing during meditation or frightening symptoms when they try to force awakening. It is not that the serpent resists. It is that she listens. She waits for the temple to be softened, for the doors to be opened. In America, where strength often means suppression, don't cry, don't shake, don't break, the temple remains sealed. Trauma hides behind clenched jaws, stiff shoulders, braced hips. The serpent sleeps, not because she is weak, but because we are not yet willing to feel. Ancient cultures never forgot that the body is sacred space. In Egypt, temples were designed as mirrors of the human form. The outer courtyard, like the limbs, the inner chamber, like the heart, the hidden sanctuary, like the skull's pineal chamber. Priests walked through architecture as though moving through a giant body. In India, yogis spoke of the body as the shrine of Atman, the indwelling soul. Each chakra was seen as a lotus blooming inside the temple of flesh. Dance, chant, and ritual were not performed for entertainment, but as ways of tuning the body into a vessel of divine energy. In Christianity, Paul wrote, "Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit." In Native American traditions, sweat lodges represented the womb of Mother Earth, a place to purify body and spirit together. Across continents, the message was the same. The sacred is not elsewhere. It is here in the body. But modern America largely abandoned this view. Churches shifted focus to heaven beyond the flesh. Medicine treated the body as separate from spirit. And in the void left behind, consumer culture stepped in, selling us products to decorate or discipline the machine, but never to honor the temple. Kundalini cannot be fooled by cosmetics or performance. She rises only when the temple is restored. What does it mean to restore the temple? It begins with listening. Modern seekers often approach the body with command. Stretch deeper. Hold still. Breathe longer. Push through pain. But the serpent does not respond to orders. She responds to invitation. Restoring the temple means shifting from control to attunement, feeling the subtle tremor when a muscle releases, honoring the sigh that escapes during a stretch, noticing the pulse in the belly when breath deepens. This is not weakness, it is precision. Machines need control. Temples need reverence. When you listen to the body, the serpent hears the resonance. The doors of the temple begin to open. How do we practice this listening? Ancient traditions offer clues. Spinal waves, rolling the spine slowly, vertebra by vertebra, not as exercise, but as awakening, feeling the body ripple like water. Hip circles, gentle rotations like drawing infinity signs with the pelvis, unlocking the bowl where life force begins. Breath spirals, inhaling into the belly, exhaling upward through the spine, imagining breath moving in spirals instead of lines. Touch rituals, placing one hand on the heart, one on the belly, breathing between them until warmth grows. Sound resonance, toning vowels, letting vibration move through the body as though tuning a sacred chamber. None of these require force. All of them invite presence. They remind the body it is not a machine to be optimized, but a temple to be sung open. Consider the difference between two common American experiences. In the gym, bodies are lined in rows of machines. Headphones block out sound. Each person pushes, lifts, runs, metrics glowing on digital screens. Progress is measured in numbers. The body is a project, the goal external. Now imagine a Native American powwow. Drums beat, feet stomp the earth. Bodies circle, sway, turn. The rhythm is shared, the movement communal. No one counts calories, no one tracks heart rates. The goal is connection, ancestral, communal, divine. One treats the body as a machine, the other treats it as a temple. Kundalini rises in the second, not the first. Perhaps the greatest trap in modern spirituality is performance. We sit in meditation postures for hours, not because our bodies ask for stillness, but because we've been told this is the way. We strain to appear serene, enlightened, disciplined. We confuse rigidity for virtue. But the serpent does not care how perfect we look. She cares how honest we feel. Embodiment means allowing the body to tremble when grief arises, to sigh when tension melts, to sway when joy bubbles. It means being real, not rigid. Performance impresses others. Embodiment invites the divine. One of the heaviest chains binding the American body is shame. From early childhood, many are taught to distrust their instincts. Don't touch yourself. Don't dance like that. Don't cry. Don't be too loud. The pelvis, the hips, the belly all become zones of suppression. Pleasure is branded sinful. Emotion is labeled weakness. Desire is twisted into secrecy. Kundalini cannot rise through shame. She is eros, fluidity, fire. When the temple is covered in veils of guilt, the serpent remains hidden. To dissolve shame is to reclaim the temple as sacred, to honor pleasure not as indulgence but as prayer, to see tears not as failure but as baptism, to let the body speak again. The American body has been trained to march, to climb, to perform. But the serpent refuses these commands. She will not awaken in a machine. She awakens in a temple, a body that listens, softens, breathes, and remembers itself as sacred space. A body willing to spiral, to sway, to feel. When you stop treating your body as a problem to fix and begin treating it as a sanctuary to inhabit, something changes. The serpent stirs. The temple glows. You realize the truth. You were never meant to conquer your body. You were meant to enter it fully. You were never meant to transcend it. You were meant to sanctify it. The machine breaks under pressure. The temple opens under reverence. And in that opening, Kundalini remembers the path. In America, power has long been imagined in masculine terms. The skyscraper piercing the skyline, the soldier marching in straight lines, the CEO climbing the corporate ladder, the politician delivering speeches of control and conquest. But Kundalini is not masculine power. She is Shakti, the primordial feminine torrent, fluid, cyclical, unpredictable, and alive. She does not march, she dances. She does not conquer, she seduces. She does not obey commands. She responds to resonance. And yet, in a culture that often suppresses the feminine, whether in women's bodies, in emotions, or in the natural cycles of life, it is no wonder Kundalini stays silent. She waits for her own essence to be honored. To awaken Kundalini is to awaken Shakti. And to awaken Shakti is to restore what America has too often forgotten, the sacred feminine. The feminine has never disappeared completely in American imagination. She shows up as Lady Liberty, torch raised against the night, symbol of freedom welcoming immigrants at Ellis Island. She shows up as Mother Earth, invoked in environmental movements and indigenous traditions. She whispers through the archetype of the wild woman, the frontier spirit who refuses to be tamed. But these are fragments. Lady Liberty was cast in copper, not flesh. Mother Earth was romanticized but exploited. The wild woman was admired, then mocked. For most of American history, the feminine was disciplined into silence. Women's voices were excluded from pulpits, courtrooms, and political halls. Emotions were dismissed as irrational. Sensuality was branded dangerous. Even in spirituality, the divine was often imaged as father, lord, king, but rarely as mother, lover, or goddess. Kundalini, as Shakti, embodies everything this culture tried to suppress. She is wildness. She is sensuality. She is cyclical time. She is water, blood, birth, death, renewal. She is not afraid of chaos, for chaos is where creation begins. The serpent sleeps when her very essence is shamed. The American dream was built on control. Control of land, of nature, of labor, of markets. Control promised safety, order, and dominance. But Kundalini does not thrive under control. She is not a corporation to be managed or a schedule to be enforced. She is river, ocean, storm. Try to dam her and she floods. Try to discipline her and she hides. This is why so many Americans practicing spiritual disciplines find themselves frustrated. They meditate harder, hold postures longer, breathe with force. They approach awakening as conquest. But Shakti cannot be conquered. She will not rise for domination. She rises for surrender. She awakens when the body softens, when the breath flows, when the temple of flesh becomes receptive, not rigid. She rises when the feminine principle, fluid, intuitive, creative, is welcomed back into the soul. One of the most suppressed gateways to Kundalini is sexuality. In the American landscape, sexuality has been twisted into extremes. On one side, puritanical repression. Don't touch, don't feel, don't desire. On the other, hyper-commercialization, sex sold in ads, movies, and industries stripped of sacredness. Both extremes sever the link between sensuality and spirituality. Pleasure becomes either sinful or trivial. The pelvis, the bowl of life force, becomes a site of shame. But in tantric traditions, Kundalini is awakened precisely through this space. The serpent rests at the base of the spine, coiled in the sacral chakra, waiting for the body to reclaim erotic innocence. This does not mean indulgence or fantasy. It means honoring pleasure as prayer, touch as ritual, desire as doorway. It means healing the fracture between flesh and spirit. When Americans reclaim erotic intelligence, not as commodity, not as taboo, but as sacred, they reclaim Shakti. And Shakti stirs the serpent awake. Cultures across the world have preserved practices that honor the feminine force. In Sufi whirling, dervishes spin in skirts like galaxies, surrendering to divine ecstasy. In hula, Hawaiian dancers tell stories of earth and ocean with circling hips. In African tribal dances, pelvic undulations awaken ancestral memory and connect the body to the land. In Tantra, Union of Shakti and Shiva is celebrated not as metaphor but as embodied ritual. All of these practices embrace what American culture often resists: movement that is circular, sensual, emotional, intuitive. When these practices entered the US, many were watered down, stripped of their wildness. Yoga became exercise, belly dance became performance, meditation became productivity hack. The feminine current was sanitized, made safe. But Shakti is not safe. She is sacred, and sacredness is always untamed. Despite suppression, Shakti has erupted in American history through waves of cultural revolution. The women's suffrage movement, demanding voice, demanding vote, was Shakti rising. The feminist waves of the 20th century, claiming freedom over body, sexuality, and work, were Shakti rising. The civil rights movement, the environmental movement, the queer liberation movement, all carried her fingerprints. For Shakti is not only feminine in gender, but feminine in principle. Liberation, fluidity, creation, resistance to control. Even in pop culture, Shakti shines through. Aretha Franklin's Soul, Janis Joplin's Howl, Beyoncé's unapologetic embodiment, all awaken a raw energy that makes the body tremble. They channel not just talent, but life force. Every time America has been transformed, it was because the feminine force surged through its veins. If Shakti is so powerful, why is she feared? Because she dissolves illusions of control. She strips away the masks of certainty. She demands vulnerability, chaos, surrender. For centuries, patriarchy feared women's bodies because they bleed, birth, and renew without permission. Churches feared pleasure because it could not be contained by doctrine. Governments feared movements led by emotion and song because they could not be policed by reason alone. In personal lives, many fear the feminine within themselves. Men are taught to suppress softness. Women are taught to suppress power. Emotions are disciplined into silence. But Kundalini cannot rise where the feminine is feared. She waits for the courage to embrace chaos as sacred. When Shakti is welcomed, she becomes the great healer. She flows like water through frozen places. She melts shame with warmth. She awakens the hips, the womb, the heart. She teaches that feeling is not weakness, but wisdom. Somatic therapists have found that trauma unwinds through movement, breath, and sound, through the very qualities of Shakti. Tears, trembling, laughter, moans, these are not breakdowns, but breakthroughs. They are the feminine current washing the temple clean. When Americans learn to honor these expressions, instead of suppressing them, they discover that healing was never about control. It was about allowing Shakti to flow. Kundalini is not only Shakti. She is Shakti rising to meet Shiva, the masculine stillness at the crown. Their union is the marriage of movement and stillness, chaos and order, body and spirit. But in America, we have overemphasized Shiva, the still, the disciplined, the controlled. We meditate harder, sit straighter, breathe longer. We mistake rigidity for enlightenment. Without Shakti, Shiva is sterile. Without feminine flow, masculine stillness becomes prison. Only when Shakti spirals upward, meeting Shiva's light, does awakening occur. This union is not only cosmic, it is personal. It is the marriage of our own inner feminine and masculine, our own softness and strength, our own fluidity and structure. America has always wrestled with the feminine. We feared her, suppressed her, sold her image, but rarely honored her. And yet, she has always returned, in movements, in music, in bodies that refused to be silenced. Kundalini will not rise until Shakti is remembered, until the body is not shamed but sanctified, until pleasure is not taboo but prayer, until surrender is not weakness but wisdom. The serpent at the base of the spine is not only energy. She is the feminine soul of humanity. And for America, she is medicine. To awaken Kundalini is not to climb higher, but to bow lower, to the hips, to the womb, to the waters of the body, to the cycles of the earth. It is to remember that divinity does not only roar in thunder, it whispers in the soft spiral of breath. And when America remembers this, when the feminine is honored as sacred, the serpent will not only stir in individuals, she will rise in the culture itself. When Americans first heard of Kundalini, they imagined fireworks, visions of light, blissful ecstasy, superhuman powers. Yoga magazines showed glowing auras. Spiritual teachers promised ascension, cosmic downloads, enlightenment in 10 easy steps. But the serpent does not move according to marketing. She rises not as spectacle, but as truth. And truth is rarely convenient. When Kundalini stirs, she brings everything to the surface, not just light, but shadow, not just bliss, but grief, not just clarity, but chaos. Awakening is not an escape from pain. It is the confrontation of pain. It is not transcendence. It is descent into what has been buried. This is the part few talk about. This is the part seekers fear. Yet this is where the serpent's true work begins. For some, the awakening begins subtly, tingling in the spine, heat in the belly, waves of energy in the chest. For others, it is dramatic, shaking limbs, spontaneous weeping, visions that overwhelm. Doctors may call it panic attacks. Therapists may call it breakdown. But mystics recognize the signs. The serpent stirring in her coils, knocking on doors of the body that have long been locked.
In American culture, where control is prized, these symptoms terrify. We medicate them, suppress them, label them as disorders. Yet often they are not malfunctions. They are the body processing what has been silenced for decades. The trembling is grief rising. The heat is rage uncoiled. The tears are shame dissolving. The visions are truths long denied. Kundalini stirs not to punish, but to cleanse. And cleansing rarely looks clean. When the serpent rises, she insists on shadow work. The shadow is the collection of everything we have disowned: anger, lust, fear, grief, shame. In American life, we are taught to bury these under productivity and politeness. We smile at work even when broken inside. We post curated happiness on social media. We medicate sadness with shopping, drinking, scrolling. But shadows do not disappear. They wait in the body, stored in hips, in guts, in jaws, until the serpent awakens them.
This is why many seekers, upon awakening, feel overwhelmed. Nightmares surface, old traumas replay. Rage bursts without warning. Depression deepens before lifting. It feels like regression, but it is not regression. It is excavation. The serpent does not skip steps. She spirals through the basements of the soul, illuminating what was hidden. Only what is faced can be released. Only what is integrated can become strength. If shadow work is essential, why does it terrify Americans so deeply? Because America is built on the illusion of control. From tidy suburbs to rigid schedules, from glossy advertisements to political slogans, chaos is painted as the enemy. We want order, certainty, predictability. But Kundalini is chaos. She is the storm that uproots false foundations. She is the earthquake that cracks rigid walls. She is the wildfire that burns away dead wood. This is not destruction for cruelty's sake. It is destruction for renewal. Native American traditions understood this. Fire clears land so new growth can emerge. But modern America fears fire. We suppress it until it rages uncontrollably. So too with Kundalini. When we fear chaos, we repress her. And repression only makes her rise more violently. Every tradition has named this phase. The mystics of Europe called it the dark night of the soul. Jungian psychology called it the descent into the unconscious. Shamans spoke of death and rebirth. The imagery is consistent. Before illumination comes darkness. Before rebirth comes death. For the American seeker, this may feel like losing everything. Sleep dissolves into restless nights. Careers feel meaningless. Relationships collapse under the weight of authenticity. Emotions swing like storms. Faith itself feels shattered. This is not failure, it is passage. The serpent is burning away identities, roles, and masks that no longer serve. She is dissolving the false self so the true self can emerge. The dark night is not punishment, it is initiation. History is filled with cautionary tales of those who forced awakening without preparation. A man in California practiced breathwork obsessively until his body shook uncontrollably for weeks. He was hospitalized for psychosis. A woman in New York joined a cult that promised quick Kundalini activation. She emerged traumatized, unable to sleep, haunted by visions. These stories circulate as warnings. Kundalini is dangerous. But the danger is not Kundalini. The danger is force without foundation, awakening without grounding, chaos without guidance. Ancient traditions had elders, rituals, and safeguards. Modern seekers often have YouTube tutorials and ego-driven teachers. No wonder the serpent wreaks havoc. When the temple is unprepared, the serpent's fire scorches instead of sanctifies. Imagine Kundalini as lightning entering a house. If the wiring is old, if circuits are broken, the house catches fire. If the wiring is strong, the house glows with light. The body is the house. Trauma, rigidity, shame, these are broken wires. Practices of embodiment, surrender, breath, and movement are rewiring. The serpent is not the problem. The house is. Prepare the house, and the lightning blesses instead of burns. This preparation is not glamorous. It means years of emotional honesty, therapy, somatic release, community support. It means creating safety in the nervous system, softness in the body, humility in the ego. Then, when the serpent stirs, chaos becomes rhythm. Fire becomes illumination. The greatest American misconception is that Kundalini awakening is an achievement, a spiritual promotion, a badge of enlightenment. But awakening is not addition. It is subtraction. It is not becoming more, it is becoming less, less false, less armored, less divided. When the serpent rises, she strips away illusions. The image you perform for approval, the certainty you cling to for safety, the control you hold to avoid feeling. She undoes you. She dissolves what is not real. What remains is raw, naked, untamed. This is why awakening feels like death, because the self that managed your life until now cannot survive in her fire. And yet, in this death, life begins. Though terrifying, the serpent's chaos brings gifts. On the other side of trembling comes release. On the other side of grief comes clarity. On the other side of rage comes power. Seekers who endure the storm often emerge with a body more alive, sensing currents of energy in every breath, emotions more honest, flowing without shame, intuition sharpened, guiding choices beyond logic, creativity unlocked, pouring into art, music, writing, compassion deepened, born from having faced their own darkness. The chaos was not punishment, it was purification. Kundalini does not rise to give superpowers, she rises to make you real. So, what happens when the serpent stirs? Not the fantasy of instant bliss, nor the nightmare of endless torment. What happens is truth. She awakens what you have buried. She burns what you no longer need. She dismantles what is false. She births what is real. To awaken Kundalini is not to conquer shadow, but to embrace it. Not to eliminate chaos, but to dance with it. Not to escape life, but to descend more fully into it. The serpent stirs not to take you away from the world, but to return you to it, raw, alive, embodied, awake. And in that return, you realize the paradox. Awakening is not the end of chaos. Awakening is learning to let chaos be sacred. When most people hear the word Kundalini, they imagine a solitary yogi, eyes closed, spine straight, lost in ecstasy. But awakening was never meant to remain private. It was always meant to ripple outward, to spiral from the body into community, from the temple into society. In America, spirituality has often been individualized. My practice, my healing, my enlightenment. But the serpent does not rise for one person alone. She rises through one to touch many. She rises in communities, in cultures, in movements. The question is not only how does Kundalini awaken in me, but how does Kundalini awaken in us? What would it mean for America itself to become a spiral nation? America was built on straight lines. State borders cut across rivers and mountains. Streets were laid in grids. Life was imagined as a ladder, upward mobility, career progress, financial growth. The mythology was linear, always forward, always higher, always more.
But this linear dream has reached its limits. We see it in burnout, in inequality, in ecological collapse. Straight-line thinking devours the earth and exhausts the soul. The spiral offers another vision. Not endless growth, but cyclical balance. Not conquest, but renewal. Not rigid hierarchies, but flowing interconnection. Imagine if America reimagined itself not as an empire marching forward, but as a spiral culture, returning to wisdom again and again, deepening instead of merely rising. How does this look in practice? It begins in the smallest rhythms of daily life. Breath. Instead of controlling breath with force, imagine it as a spiral. Inhale, circling down into the belly. Exhale, spiraling up the spine. Movement. In the morning, rather than stiff exercise alone, allow the body to sway, rotate, spiral. Let the spine undulate, the hips draw circles. Movement as prayer, not punishment. Relationships. Stop expecting love to progress in straight lines. First date, marriage, happily ever after. Instead, embrace cycles, moments of closeness, moments of distance, returning deeper each time. Work. Rather than endless productivity, honor seasons, times of intensity, times of rest, times of reflection. Spiral, not grind. Learning. Understand that wisdom is not a ladder of degrees, but a spiral of returning insights, each time revisiting old truths at higher levels of awareness. Spiral living is not abstract, it is practical. It is the antidote to burnout, loneliness, and disconnection.
To live the spiral is to honor the feminine principle, not only in women, but in society itself. It means valuing intuition alongside reason, emotion alongside logic, collaboration alongside competition, cycles alongside growth. Imagine schools that teach not only information, but embodiment. Children learning to breathe, dance, express. Imagine workplaces that honor rhythms of rest, not just deadlines. Imagine healthcare that listens to the body's intelligence, not just prescribes pills. The serpent rising in culture means softening the rigid masculine obsession with control and restoring balance with the feminine flow of life. This does not weaken society, it heals it. A spiral nation is not fragile, it is resilient because it can bend, adapt, and renew. What about justice? America's legal system is famously rigid, laws as straight lines, prisons as straight cells. But healing does not come from rigidity. It comes from cycles of accountability and restoration. Indigenous justice systems across the world use circles, truth-telling circles, healing circles, reconciliation circles. They recognize that harm is not erased by punishment alone, but by returning again and again to truth, apology, repair. A spiral approach to justice would not ignore harm. It would move through it, allowing those harmed and those who harmed to spiral back toward humanity. Kundalini teaches us this. Energy blocked becomes violence. Energy moving becomes transformation. America's justice, too, must spiral if it is to heal. Nowhere is the spiral more needed than in our relationship with Earth. Linear culture treats Earth as resource. Dig, burn, use, discard. But Earth herself moves in cycles, seasons, tides, renewals. When we ignore her spiral, we suffer droughts, floods, fires, collapse. Living Kundalini in the modern world means aligning human culture with Earth's spirals, farming in regenerative cycles, not endless extraction, energy flowing in renewable loops, not one-way consumption, cities designed with curves, green spaces, water flow, not only concrete grids. Native traditions here always knew this. They saw the earth not as machine, but as mother. To awaken Kundalini collectively is to return to this reverence. What about technology? The heartbeat of modern America. Can it belong to the spiral? Yes, if we reimagine it. Right now, technology often accelerates linear consumption, faster scrolling, endless feeds, constant alerts. It fragments the body, traps the mind. But spiral technology would amplify rhythm, not rigidity. It would guide people back into cycles, apps that encourage breathing with the tides, platforms that foster real community, designs inspired by biomimicry. Even science already recognizes this. From spiral turbines to vortex energy fields, engineers are rediscovering what shamans always knew. Energy flows best when it spirals. The challenge is cultural, to ensure our tools serve life, not consume it, to ensure technology extends the spiral, not erases it. Can an entire nation awaken? History suggests yes. Cultural awakenings have happened before. The Civil Rights Movement, when voices long silenced, erupted like a serpent rising from America's spine. The Environmental Awakening, when rivers catching fire forced the nation to remember Earth's fragility. The Spiritual Awakening of the 1960s, flawed and chaotic, yet seeding yoga, meditation, and holistic healing into the mainstream. Each was messy. Each stirred shadow and resistance. Each demanded descent before ascent. This is exactly how Kundalini moves. She spirals through chaos, not around it. America's collective awakening will be no different. The serpent will bring both light and shadow to the surface. The question is whether we resist her or learn to dance. Living in a spiral nation begins with individuals. You cannot wait for government or corporations to awaken for you. Your breath is where it begins. Your spine, your willingness to listen to your body, to honor its cycles, to dissolve shame, to embrace movement. When you shift, you influence. Your relationships shift. Your community shifts. Culture shifts. Awakening spirals outward, never staying contained. You may feel small, but remember, DNA itself is a spiral so tiny it is invisible to the eye, yet it encodes all life. Your spiral practice, too, encodes more than you imagine. The serpent does not rise to give you escape. She rises to give you embodiment. She does not lift you away from America's problems. She teaches you how to meet them with new rhythm. Living Kundalini in the modern world does not mean abandoning cities for caves. It means bringing spiral wisdom into streets, homes, workplaces, courts, and schools. It means breathing spirals into stress, moving spirals into stiffness, embodying spirals into culture. The straight line has led us to exhaustion. The spiral invites us to renewal. And the most beautiful truth is this: the spiral never ends. It turns and turns, deepening, widening, flowing. Awakening is not a final state. It is a living rhythm. So when you feel the serpent stir, when your breath circles, when your hips sway, remember, you are not just an individual seeker. You are part of a nation learning to spiral again. And perhaps that is the destiny of America, not to be the greatest empire in a straight line of history, but to become a spiral nation, alive, renewing, awakening again and again.